Welcome back to Media7, where we're looking at the Law Commission's new paper on options for recognising and regulating new media. I'm joined now by Bernard Hickey, whose financial website interest.co.nz makes prodigious use of new media tools, and by the owner of the Pundit blog, Tim Watkin, who, when he's not in his pyjamas, is the producer of TV1's Q&A show. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Sorry about the pyjamas.
It's all right.
Bernard, the paper and John Burrows there talked about all these privileges extended in law to the news media. Are these privileges relevant to you doing what you do?
Partially, yes. We actually have a reporter in the press gallery who has access to parliamentary debates, which there are some legislative rules around that. Now, we've managed to apply under those rules and get in there in our own form without being an official media. Interest.co.nz isn't a formal publisher in the television or newspaper sense, but we've managed to get in there. And there are some privileges with courts that we don't use at the moment, but we could use in the future. And having an official status as an accredited blog site, if you like, could be a useful thing for us, particularly as we migrate into the mainstream of advertising and regulators and governments. You know, we want to be part of the established world.
Do you accept the contention that those privileges should be balanced by accountabilities?
Absolutely. When we publish online, we have this, can potentially have the same impact as publishing in a newspaper or on television. It also seems unfair in a way that we have some advantages over broadcasters and newspaper publishers in that we aren't regulated at the moment. We really could do anything and get away with it, so to speak, apart from the reputational damage that we do to ourselves. And it doesn't seem fair, really, that newspapers are policed by the Press Council and broadcasters by the Broadcasting Standards Authority, but bloggers by nothing. And there are some gaps opening up now where, for example, broadcasters can have blog sites that are unregulated, but the same reports are regulated when they're broadcast. So I think it's a sensible possibility to have one regulator for all the sectors, and also to allow voluntary involvement. So those people who want to be serious, if you like, and who want those privileges can apply for them and be a grown-up in the world of media.
Tim, with your pundit hat on, is this relevant to you, all this? Would you apply to be, would you volunteer, put your hand up to be regulated?
At first blush, probably not. I mean, Bernard's in the rare position of an online company actually who earns their living online. There's very few of us who can do that. So Interest.co sits in an interesting place on the spectrum. You'd be one of the few companies, online businesses, I would have thought, that would want to reach across like that and sees growth into the mainstream. Most of us online, while the privileges and exemptions applied to media are interesting, they're not ones they're privileges I don't want. They're exemptions I don't use. The source protection's an interesting one, in that there is a...
We're talking about journalists protecting the sources of stories, which the Evidence Act actually gives you some protection.
There is some code around the fact that it's not clear in law, but there is some implication that if you're a journalist, you can protect your source. If you're an ordinary citizen, then you're just obstructing justice by not telling the police certain things. That could be applied for a site like Pundit, but in most cases we're about opinion, we're about analysis, so it's what happens up here. I guess part of what I have to figure out in a scenario like this is, as a professional journalist, how far that extends from my day job into my website, as opposed to someone who writes on my website like a Mike Williams, who has no journalism background and no journalist protection. Do I get treated differently by the law than he does?
Is there not any appeal in the reputational benefit of putting your hand up and saying we adhere to a code of ethics?
Probably not for what our site does. We stand and fall on the reputation, the quality of our writing and writers and analysis.
Sites like yours, political sites, specialist sites around the courts, will grow and will be in a position where they'll need to. If you look at the transition in the United States, where you have the likes of Politico, HuffPo, ProPublica,
TPM.
These are significant businesses, media businesses in the traditional sense. They are exclusively online. They employ journalists, investigators who do investigations.
Perhaps there's a couple more than just two categories in this, because there's what you do online, what we do, which gets closer to that. But then there are many bloggers who are just out and out ranters, or you know, who get nowhere near this
who don't have to join up. But the interesting,
and you don't want them to be journalists. You know, they're not actually.
And the full version of the interview, I did ask John Burrows. So we'd be responsible for everything on our sites, would we? And he said yes. That includes the comments. I think this is going to pose quite a problem for some of the people who want those privileges. They're actually going to have to possibly tidy up what goes on by people who comment.
That's where I have some disagreement with the Commission's report, in that I actually think there is a difference between above the line, what the journalist blogger is writing, and what is being commented on below the line. Now, over time, responsible, serious blogs who want to make a living out of it will police and do police their comments. I know we do. We have a pretty aggressive policy on saying if it's defamatory or abusive or painful or dangerous, we will delete it, and we will delete the commenter, and we have registration. But there are other examples. For example, Trade Me's message boards, a particularly interesting series of discussions go on.
A legal nightmare, I would say.
That's right. There are 1 million words a day published on there.
And there are different lines. You talk about above and below the line, but then there's the above the line, the blogger's opinion. There is another line above that which I would like to think, and you and I are both trained professional journalists. I would think we do have different standards from a blogger writing their opinion, and then different standards again to the people who comment on that. When I work at TVNZ, if I get an official complaint, I can talk to 3 or 4 lawyers at the drop of a hat. On Pundit, when I earn a few $100s a year, basically, there's no way I can afford lawyers. I can't moderate everything on my site. I just cannot reach those standards, which is why I'd probably stay out of it.
Before we go, Tim, in some ways the big kahuna in this whole paper is the suggestion of the abolition of the Broadcasting Standards Authority. No more statutory regulator, all independent. What do you make of that?
Look, I think the BSA could do with some reform. My concern, I guess, is where it ends up, is that the type of organisation they're talking about now is something informal, something that is a good, easy process. The BSA started that way. It was meant to be an informal process. Now it can take 6 months to get a ruling. You can get dozens of lawyers involved and cost tens of thousands of dollars. We need to be very careful that we don't end up in that place. If we can keep it informal, great, but we don't want it to be just a bastion for lawyers.
Well, we'll see what happens. I gather the Broadcasting Standards Authority is foretelling its own demise, so I think things will change. Thank you, Bernard Hickey and Tim Watkin. Now, the court report, which follows the show, will be weighing up how a new media regulator might look. This year's riots in England spawned a swarm of theories about the rioters and their means and motivations. While most of the press has moved on, the Guardian newspaper asked hundreds of them why they did what they did. Jose Barbosa looks at the project, reading the riots.
If there's one category of stock footage that's been overused this year, it's the DVD wallet labelled Street Chaos. For the United Kingdom, though, the August riots seem to be something new, although the response to it by the mainstream was anything but.
There's just no sense at all of any political motivation in all of this. This is recreational violence, recreational rioting that's spread out of control.
This was not political protest or a riot about protest or about politics. It was common or garden thieving, robbing and looting, and we don't need an inquiry to tell us that.
In the absence of any meaningful official inquiry, The Guardian has teamed up with the London School of Economics and created its own case-based study of the unrest.
The inspiration, strangely enough, came from Detroit in 1967. And in the aftermath of those riots, a university had teamed up with a newspaper to conduct social research, speaking to the people who were responsible for the riots in the city. So we got in touch with the people who ran that study in 1967, talked to them, and decided actually this would be something really interesting for us to do here.
The Guardian employed a team of 30 researchers who spent 3 months interviewing 270 people who were directly involved in the riots.
When we came across a police car, it felt like we hit the jackpot. We smashed it, we petrol bombed it. We thought we'd just kind of violate, just like they violate us.
The researchers found many of their interview subjects saw the riots as being an anti-police protest.
I've seen my friends get beaten up in front of me by the police officer. But what can you do? You can't turn around and say, I'm going to write a statement or I'm going to send off a letter. You never get a reply, nothing ever gets done about it.
73% of the people interviewed have been stopped and searched in the last year. Also cited as a concern by many of the interviewees was budget spending cuts and rising costs, particularly in education.
To go from what my sister paid was, I think it was £1,000 in tuition fees. She's 6 years older than me, she paid £1,000, I paid £3,000, and they want 9 now. So you've tripled it once and tripled it again, and you expect everyone to just sit back and take it on the chin.
Assumptions about who was driving the riots have been challenged.
At the heart of all the violence sits the issue of street gangs. Territorial, hierarchical and incredibly violent, they are mostly composed of young boys, mainly from dysfunctional homes.
That's not backed up by the study's findings.
The small proportion of gang members who were present behaved in an atypical manner. Across England, postcode rivalries and gang hostilities dissolved for what was effectively a 4-day truce.
You had different areas that had gang-related problems working together. Everyone put their problems away for that week.
This is only phase 1 of the investigation. Phase 2 will include interviews with police, judges and court officials. But it's already been made clear that there exists a terrible distance between the rioters and the political elite, both sides unable to understand the motivations of the other.
The whites have become black. A particular sort of violent, destructive, nihilistic gangster culture has become the fashion.
Do you have any regrets?
Yeah, but that did do more damage.
And yes, you heard that right, 30 people hired to work on one story. And that's our show for this week. Thanks again to Bernard Hickey and Tim Watkin. We'll be back with the year's final Media7 next week. Until then, goodbye.